Hello and happy new year. Before we begin today's conversation, I want to pause and say a big thank you to everyone who listened, shared, commented, challenged, and reflected with us over the past year. Your engagement made this podcast more than just content, it made it a community. Your willingness to wrestle with hard leadership questions, not just quick answers, is what gives this space meaning. As we stepped into a new year, I wish you clarity where the path feels uncertain, courage where leadership feels costly, and also steadiness in the moments that will test you the most. Once again, a happy 2026 to you. And with that, I want us to turn our attention to what I refer to as the quiet crisis of leadership unfolding in 2026, and for which adaptive leaders and all leaders need to watch in order to be able to make effective progress. And the first that I want to mention is leading humans in an AI-saturated workplace. AI is no longer a future disruption. It is a daily presence. Tasks that once defined expertise are now executed faster, cheaper, and with unsettling precision by machines. For many employees, the threat is not unemployment alone, it is irrelevance. When algorithms outperform humans in analysis, prediction, and execution, people begin to ask a deeper, quieter question. If the machine can do this better, what am I here for? That question strikes at identity, not productivity. As AI absorbs more cognitive labor, leaders are witnessing an erosion of meaning at work. Roles that once carried pride and professional identity feel thinner, transactional, and provisional. People still show up, but something essential is missing. Commitment rooted in purpose rather than compliance. Left unaddressed, this loss of meaning doesn't produce open resistance. It produces disengagement, emotional withdrawal, and a subtle decline in judgment and care. Now, this is where leadership, not technology, becomes decisive. Leaders in 2026 should no longer just be responsible for performance. They should be custodians of dignity. That means protecting spaces where human judgment matters, where moral reasoning outweighs speed, and where trust is built through discretion, context, and accountability. Qualities that no algorithm can replicate. When leaders outsource too much decision making to systems, they unintentionally communicate that human discernment is optional. And this is my suggestion. In 2026, leaders must move beyond asking what AI can do and begin asking what leadership must protect, what the action of leadership must protect. Deliberately decide what will not be automated and be unapologetic about it. Guard decision spaces that involve values, ethics, human judgment, and real consequences. Make these boundaries visible. When leaders fail to name it, people assume that discernment no longer matters and disengagement quietly follows. Just as important, invite people into the discomfort of redefining their value. Don't rush to reassure. Don't overpromise reskilling slogans. Hold the tension long enough for learning to occur. Adaptive leadership here means helping people let go of outdated identities while discovering new ways to contribute that machines cannot replace. Because when efficiency becomes the loudest value, meaning doesn't disappear overnight, it erodes slowly. And when meaning erodes, leadership doesn't collapse loudly, it fades. My second point is decision making without certainty. Leaders were trained in the world that rewarded analysis, prediction, and confidence. Gather the data, reduce the risk, make the call. But in today's world, leaders are discovering that the data is often incomplete. The risks are interconnected and the window to decide closes before clarity arrives. Waiting for certainty now feels responsible, but often becomes a sophisticated form of delay. What's emerging instead is a new leadership demand, the capacity to decide without guarantees and remain psychologically steady afterward. The real strain isn't making the decision, it's living with the ambiguity and absorbing second guessing and resisting the urge to overcorrect at the first sign of discomfort. Leaders aren't just deciding anymore, they are containing anxiety and their own and everyone else's. This challenges a deeply held myth that strong leaders always know. In reality, strong leadership in 2026 will look more like courage than confidence. It's the willingness to choose, stay present, and learn publicly without pretending that the outcome was obvious all along. And this is my suggestion, or you would say a leadership hack. Stop asking, am I certain? And start asking, can I stay steady if this unfolds imperfectly? Strengthen your capacity to learn from imperfect outcomes. Enduring leaders aren't defined by perfect decisions, but by the ability to remain steady when outcomes are uncertain. And my third point is burnout at the top when high performance becomes slow collapse. These days, burnout rarely announces itself with exhaustion or breakdown. It's quieter and more dangerous. It shows up as emotional flatness, shortened patience, and executives who still perform exceptionally well but no longer feel connected to what they're doing. From the outside, everything looks fine. From the inside, something essential has gone missing. This happens when ambition, identity, and responsibility slowly fuse. The role stops being something you do and becomes who you are. Rest feels irresponsible. Stepping back feels like failure. Over time, leaders normalize chronic depletion and mistake numbness for resilience. Because the system keeps rewarding output, the warning signs are easy to ignore. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth leaders are wrestling with. Not all burnout looks like collapse. Some of it looks like success that cost more than it should. And by the time it becomes visible, the damage to judgment, relationships, and meaning, it's already done. And this is what I suggest. My suggestion, or you'll say a leadership hack. Audit where your identity is doing the work your systems should be doing. If everything depends on you, that's not commitment. It's overfunctioning. Sustainable leadership requires separating your worth from your workload before the system forces that separation for you. And my fourth point is accountability without control in hybrid and remote teams. The early response to hybrid work leaned heavily on surveillance, tracking activity, monitoring presence, and measuring responsiveness. Leaders are discovering that this approach doesn't create accountability. It creates compliance at best and quiet resentment at worst. When people feel watched, ownership disappears. True accountability in this environment requires something harder: clarity without control. Leaders must be explicit about outcomes, standards, and responsibilities, and then tolerate the anxiety that comes from not constantly checking. That anxiety is real, but avoiding it by micromanaging only teaches teams that trust is conditional. The key shift is profound, moving from watching people work to holding people responsible for results. That requires adult to adult conversations, not parental oversight, and it demands leaders who are willing to let go of control without letting go of standards. And this is my suggestion, or you will say a leadership hack for this point. Replace activity metrics with outcome agreements. Be painfully clear about what success looks like, and then step back. If you feel anxious, resist tightening control. Sit with the discomfort. Trust is built when leaders tolerate uncertainty without hovering. And my fifth point is resistance has changed from open pushback to quiet sabotage. Resistance often doesn't look like confrontation. It looks like agreement followed by inaction. People nod in meetings, use the right language, and then disengage quietly once the call ends. Execution slows, energy drops. Nothing is technically wrong, but nothing moves. Leaders often misread this as apathy or laziness. In reality, it is more often unacknowledged loss. People sense what they are being asked to give up: status, competence, identity, but don't feel safe naming it. So resistance goes underground, where it's harder to address and easier to deny. Adaptive leaders learn to treat these signals as data, not defiance. Silence, delay, and minimal effort are forms of communication. The work is not to push harder, but to surface what people are protecting themselves from losing. And this is my suggestion. When execution stalls, stop repeating the strategy and start asking loss-based questions. What feels at risk for you in this change? Resistance softens when leaders name what others are afraid to say. And my next point is authority isn't enough anymore. Titles still carry weight, but they no longer guarantee followership. In 2026, leaders and executives will continue to face the sobering reality. People comply when watched, but disengage when not, and quietly test whether leadership is relational or merely positional. Authority can enforce behavior, but it cannot inspire commitment. So when leaders rely too heavily on raw power, they often mistake silence for buy-in and compliance for trust. But influence today is earned through credibility, consistency, and the willingness to engage discomfort, not through hierarchy alone. People are less impressed by titles and more attentive to how leaders show up under pressure. This forces leaders into an uncomfortable self-examination. Am I leading or am I being obeyed? The answer shows up when things get hard, ambiguous, or unpopular. Now, this is my suggestion, or you will say a leadership hack for this point. Pay attention to what happens when you are not in the room. If momentum dies, influence is missing. Invest less energy in enforcing authority and more in building trust, clarity, and shared ownership, especially when decisions are difficult. And my final point is culture is being shaped by what leaders avoid. Culture isn't imploding, it's drifting. And the drift is harder to see than collapse. The strongest cultural signals today aren't coming from vision statements or town halls, but from patterns leaders quietly tolerate. What goes unaddressed slowly becomes normalized. Unchallenged behavior, tolerated mediocrity, and postponed conversations teach people what truly matters. Not intentionally, but effectively. Over time, leaders begin inheriting a culture they didn't choose but helped create through avoidance. This is why culture change efforts fail when leaders focus on messaging instead of behavior. Culture listens less to what leaders say and more to what they are willing to confront when it's uncomfortable. And this is my suggestion. Identify one conversation you've been postponing until the timing is right. That delay is already shaping culture. Address it, not perfectly, but honestly. Culture shifts when leaders choose courage over comfort. And these are my closing reflections. I want you to notice that all 7 of these leadership tensions have been pointing toward not technology, not trends, not tools, but people. Decision making without certainty asks whether leaders can stay human when outcomes are unclear. Burnout at the top reveals what happens when leaders confuse performance with worth. Accountability without control tests whether trust can survive without surveillance. Quiet resistance exposes unspoken fear and loss. The limits of authority remind us that compliance is not commitment, and culture drift shows how meaning erodes when leaders avoid discomfort. None of these are technical problems. They are human challenges, and AI didn't create them. It simply accelerated them. In an AI-saturated workplace, leadership is no longer defined by how much you know, how fast you decide, or how efficiently you optimize. Those are now baseline capabilities, often handled better by machines. What cannot be automated is judgment under pressure, moral courage in uncertainty, the ability to hold tension without rushing to control, and the willingness to protect dignity when efficiency demands speed. That is the real leadership work of 2026. So when efficiency becomes the loudest value, as it will, leaders must decide what will remain human. Not accidentally, not sentimentally, but deliberately. Because if leaders and authority figures don't protect meaning, AI will quietly replace it with output. If leaders don't hold space for loss, resistance will go underground. And if leaders don't separate identity from performance, burnout will look like success. And if leaders don't choose courage over comfort, culture won't collapse, it will drift. The future of leadership isn't about competing with machines. It is about leading the humans who must now redefine who they are because machines exist. And that work, difficult, uncomfortable, and deeply human work, still belongs to us. Thank you for listening.